Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about a topic that often comes up when people are building home cockpit solutions, and that is the G1000. So Garmin's G1000, if you're not familiar with it, and if you watch this channel you probably should be, is a glass cockpit system supplied by Garmin that is fitted to a number of general aviation aircraft, including some business jets. If you're not familiar with the G1000, it might be a good idea to go and just Google it quickly and get an idea of what we're talking about here. Beyond the G1000, there are some newer versions with greater capabilities, such as the G3000 and the G5000. And in Microsoft Flight Simulator, which is the platform we're going to be talking about today, unusually for this channel, there is a simulation of the G1000 and of the G3000. And the reason I want to talk about it today on the channel is that quite often people building home cockpits where they want to use a G1000 solution as their glass cockpit will look to buy G1000 hardware. That is to say, hardware that looks and feels like a real G1000 unit and then functions internally like a G1000. Because the alternative is usually to have it running on a touchscreen and needing to touch the touchscreen to operate the buttons and the knobs on the G1000, which is pretty inefficient. Using knobs on a touchscreen is not something I enjoy doing, and I'd rather have physical controls if I can. So there are a range of different G1000 solutions available on the market, and you have companies like Emutech, you have companies like Real Sim Gear, you have more recent entrants like Aviatech. Aviatech in particular supplies a number of different G1000 units in different configurations for different kinds of aircraft types, and certainly well worth checking out. Obviously other providers are available, and I'm putting some photos of some of those units from those people up on the video, as you can see. I actually previously went with the Emutech G1000, so if you watch my older videos you will have seen sometimes I fly with a G1000 solution, sometimes I fly with just touchscreens because it's an airliner or it's something with different systems. But when I fly with a G1000 equipped aircraft or a G3000 equipped aircraft, then I used to use the hardware solution from Emutech, and actually have that unit, or one of those units here, and I'll just bring it up so you can see it. So this is the Emutech unit. As you can see, in fact this is two units. This is the PFD unit and the audio panel that goes along with it. I just mounted them in the same adapter to fit in the holes in the instrument panel. And this is pretty representative of what you would get if you buy one of these. The main difference, I think, is that the knobs they've supplied are pretty much just straight rotary encoders as they come from the factory. The actual Garmin units have different shaped caps to their rotary knobs, depending on what function it's for, and we'll see more of that in a little bit. It's a pretty solid unit. You can see it's mostly plastic construction, but then around the back here it is metal. It is reasonably thick and chunky, and it consists basically of these buttons and knobs which appear to Windows as a game controller, like any other game controller, and then the display in the middle, which is a monitor, and rather unfortunately for these it's a VGA monitor, which in my opinion should be a crime against humanity supplying a VGA monitor, but I know why they did it. It's a relatively low resolution screen. It kind of makes more sense. It's going to be cheaper to do it that way, I imagine. Then around on the back here you have, and I'll just hold it up so you can see, in this case USB is where you plug in a USB cable. You can't see my face, I just realised. So that the computer can recognise the buttons, and then the VGA connector there is where you connect from your graphics card, so that the display in here will appear as a screen in Windows. And the audio panel is similar, it just has a USB connection. There's no power or anything to it. So that's the Emutech unit, and to be honest with you, most units that you'll find out there pretty much work the same way. So the vast majority of G1000 hardware that I can find is the same deal. It's a a USB interface device representing the buttons and the knobs, and then a screen of some kind within it which is connected to your graphics card, and then you have that appear as an extra screen in Windows, and you would pop out your G1000 window. Xbone, for example, has its own built-in G1000, which I think you can pop out and put on one of these screens. Obviously you need to remove the bezel that might appear in the user interface because you have hardware buttons for that, so I think you can do that with Xplane. You can do that with the MSFS G1000 panels. You can pop them out, although at the moment it's pretty disastrous for performance, so it's not a route that I would recommend people go down, but I know people do it and it works alright. We're waiting for Asobo to really improve the sim on that front. Over in P3D land, you do have a built-in G1000 and you can pop those out, but I don't believe you can remove the bezel, so that's a problem there. But to be honest, in P3D land, most people will be using some additional software, and this is the main use case with this hardware, is that you would run some kind of G1000 simulation that you could then put on these displays. And there's two ways to do it. You can have a gauge added into the simulation, you can pop it out as normal, and then you can full screen it onto that monitor. And there is a solution from a company called Mindstar Aviation, which is popular for doing exactly that. Or you can buy additional software which runs outside the simulator. There is the Flight One Tech G1000 Student Simulator, and then finally there is Noble Flight Sim, Noble Flight Simulations. They recently introduced their own G1000 simulation software, which I think at the moment is only available to buy with their hardware solutions, which look pretty good to me, and I did investigate potentially buying it. The trouble with all of these software solutions is they are really, really expensive. I used to use the Flight One Tech G1000 Student Simulator, the Pro edition of that, and that cost me about $1,000 to buy. And then I had to pay every couple of years an additional fee to keep the support going so that I could get new versions. So it was a pretty expensive business. And I think with Noble the situation is not particularly dissimilar, and the Mindstar gauge, if you buy the professional version of that, again, that's pretty expensive. Problem with Mindstar at the moment, to be honest, is they still don't have a 64-bit version of their gauge, and it's an in-sim gauge. So if you are running a 64-bit simulator, you're kind of stuffed. But if you want to go down this route, there is at least one other option, and it's the option I really want to talk about today, because it's the option that I've chosen for the next version of the Cockpit. And actually, because I really couldn't wait, I've put it into the temporary sim, and I wanted to show it to you. And that is the Simionic G1000 solution. Now again, I can't rule out there's somebody else doing something similar to this. My research didn't turn anybody up, but my research is obviously not completely exhaustive or conclusive. But Simionic take a slightly different approach to the G1000 problem. They supply the hardware, the G1000 bezel, with all of the buttons and knobs that you would expect, but you don't connect it to your computer. Instead, you use an iPad. So it's iPad specific, there's no Android option. You need to buy and effectively fit an iPad inside the Simionic hardware. The hardware comes as a bezel standalone with all the buttons, controls, knobs that the G1000 has. They're actually a rather more faithful rendition than my Emitech, for example. And you pop the iPad in there and you connect it up internally, and then you just plug USB power into the back of it to keep it going. It connects to your wireless network, and then to client software which runs on the PC, and then talks to the sim of your choice via SimConnect. And then the bezels talk to the iPads via Bluetooth, and the PFD and MFD, if you have both, will talk to each other. And there's also an audio panel which you need to give power to, but it then connects via a feature cable to your PFD unit, and that gets you the full solution. So I thought I would first of all show you how you go about fitting the iPad into the Simionic bezel. So I've got a bit of footage of that, which I will run now. You whip the back off the unit, you take the iPad, you put it into the bezel, you connect the iPad cable to the bottom of the iPad, and then you connect it to the USB port internal to the Simionic unit, and you spend a little bit of time wrapping it up so it doesn't get in the way, and then you put the back of the unit back on, and that's kind of it. once you have that, you're ready to mount it in your cockpit. There are mounting screws to let you do that, and actually you can see here that I was able to mount it in a custom panel of my own design. All the dimensions are supplied by Simionic, and that lets you mount it in your sim, which is what I've done. So let's take a look at that. The sim is up. You can actually see Microsoft Flight Sim is running. I've got the software. Sorry, that's a bit bright. But this is the adapted software, the G1000 bridge, and it will automatically connect once it senses the iPad's on network. And so what I can do, if I simultaneously press nose up and nose down, that will wake up the iPad. That's important. My iPads are slightly older iPads. They have a home button, and the home button is underneath the bezel here, so you can't touch it. There'd be no other way to wake it up other than supplying power, which would require me to power everything down and power it up again. So if I press these two for a second or two, up it comes. And now I'm into the iPad, and I can run the PFD software. There you go. Looked like it had crashed. It's not absolutely 100% stable at the moment. There seem to be some issues that need fixing. So that's the PFD. It went dark straight away because it's now connected to the sim, and the sim is not yet started. So as far as it's concerned, the electrical power is shut off, and hence it's gone dark, although this AFCS indicator lights up, which again I think is another bug. And over here, same deal with the MFD. There we go. And go into the MFD. And you can see the MFD, the bezel's now connected via Bluetooth, and it's noticed that the PFD is on the network, it's connected to that, and it's gone dark as a result. So, alright, let's spin up the sim and get it so the G1000 is actually up and running, and I can show you a little bit more. Right, I've got the sim up and running, and I'm on the ground at London City Airport, which is somewhere I quite like to be, as you know. And I'm in the Cessna Caravan. That's important for reasons I'll mention in a moment, but you can see that the two G1000 units are up and running, and if you're familiar with the G1000, this should look pretty familiar. Now, there are some visual differences, and again, between MSFS and this, you will see quite a lot of difference, and there are reasons for that. In fact, if I pop back into the cockpit, and then I just go down to the glass display here, so you can see on the big monitor, there's the PFD there, there's my PFD there. They do look a little bit different, don't they? One reason is because that has synthetic vision, whereas I don't have that on here right now. But you'll notice that other elements look different. The reason why is just because this simulates the NXI version of the Garmin G1000, where the user interface, fonts, etc. have changed a little bit, and the Simionic unit still simulates the classic G1000. There are some important things to note. So what I want to do now is, you can see there's no altitude set there, it's 0 there, it's 0 there. If I use the altitude knob here on the G1000 to dial the altitude up, let's say to 4,000, okay, you can see it's changed in the sim, right? And that makes perfect sense because I altered the sim variable. That went through the bridge software, so this communicated over the Wi-Fi to this, which then sent a message to the simulator to say, set the altitude to 4,000. So if you're assuming that the way this works is that everything here just sends a command to the sim and then receives data back from the sim, you're not quite right. You might think you were right, but you're not, and there's an important thing that means. So, I didn't start the sim with a flight plan, as an example, so I could put a flight plan directly into the G1000 here. I mean, why don't we... Right, I think I might be able to type it now. Yes, I can. That's a recent addition to the NXI. So let's just go to Heathrow. There you go. There we go. Alright. So we've got a direct to EGLL in the G1000. Are you seeing it on the Simionic unit? No, you are not. In fact, let me get you a closer look. Okay, so here we are back on the phone camera, and as you can see, there is no flight plan on the G1000 here. So although I've gone direct to EGLL here, it's not reflected down here, and the same applies to a flight plan that you actually load into the sim before you start. It will be pre-programmed in the in-sim G1000 it will not be pre-programmed here. And actually, with the Simionic at the moment, to my mind, that's the biggest drawback. It really should mirror the flight plan data in the sim, and at least it'll be able to load a saved flight plan somehow, so you don't have to input long flight plans. So at the moment, I'd have to do direct to EGLL. There you go, and activate. So now I've got the same thing in there. And that does mean that if you've got a flight plan that you need to follow, you are going to have to put it manually into the G1000. There's no way around it. It's a real hump. The developer has previously said, well, yes, but that's what you have to do in the real aircraft. Well, yes, but also no. You'll notice that there are a couple of slot-like things on the case here. There's nothing in them, but they're there, and that's because, and we'll just have it over here, in the real G1000 unit you have 2 SD card slots, and you can put a flight plan onto the SD card and you can load it from there. Or, if you have Garmin's Bluetooth bridge, you can actually zap a flight plan across from 4Flight or other apps on an iPad or an iPhone, and again put it directly in. So they really need to add that capability. I am campaigning for it on the user group, and I'm hoping we'll get it. It makes a more general point, which is that not everything you do here is reflected over here, and not everything you do here is reflected over here. So I can, for example, set the heading to 075. It's changed the heading there. That is reflected, right? If I then put the autopilot into heading mode, ready for when I activate it, it hasn't done that up there. So when you use the autopilot controls down here, it doesn't change the autopilot modes on the PC, and vice versa. If you put the autopilot on in there, or if you disconnect it with a shortcut key, you're not going to disconnect the one here. They are separate, and in fact the autopilot function with this unit, with these units, comes from the units and from the software on the units. It doesn't come from the simulator. It's not commanding the simulator to do things, it's actually piloting the aircraft itself directly via SimConnect. So that's something you need to be aware of, because otherwise you might have issues. To be honest with you, I just pretend like the aircraft is dumb and doesn't have an autopilot or a G1000 in the sim, and just use the Simionic version and make that my controlling interest, as it were. Right, holding that camera is getting quite tiring for my arm, so we'll go back to just the main camera here. But you can see that it has the look and feel of a G1000. It has pretty much everything you'd expect. It has all the functionality you would expect. You can press the PFD and change the wind indicators and the bearing, the format for the HSI and the nav source. And as an add-on, and I want to stress this doesn't come with the bare G1000, you do have to pay a bit extra, but we're talking tiny amounts. And again, I'm talking about cost later on, but it is an extra cost. So I'll say synthetic vision, synthetic terrain, and now we've got Sim Vision. Now it's just flat terrain, so it's nothing interesting. It's not the same kind of level of synthetic vision that you have here, because again, it's original Garmin, not Garmin NXI. And you've got the flight plan menu, and you've got the procedures menu, and you can select an approach, and it has its own database of all these things. You've got the menu, you can load and activate an approach, various things like that. You've got your direct to, you've got your autopilot controls over here. For sort of the main version of the G1000, the standard version, you would have all those autopilot controls. You've got the soft keys, you've got everything over here on the MFD. You have all the map stuff that you'd be used to, so you can add terrain mapping, you can turn on the airways, you've got NextRad display, you can do that. You've got a vertical profile display, you've got topological display, etc., etc. Again, it's the older G1000, it's not the NXI version, which is a little bit enhanced. So, that's kind of all the functionality. It's what you'd expect. If you know the G1000, then you know what this is going to do for you. And it's not different in any real significant way, and it seems to work pretty well with Microsoft Flight Sim. It took them a while to get it all working, but it does all seem to work now, so you could definitely fly using it. But there is an issue, and it's the reason why I bought this system rather than sticking with the Emiotech or going for anything else. Not just the performance. If you pop these windows out, it destroys your performance, but Asobo will probably fix that. But this does something that the others do not and can't do. When you buy software like the Flight One Tech G1000 Student Simulator, you get access to a library of aircraft that they have predetermined. So they have put in the performance characteristics and the display setup for various different kinds of aircraft. With the Student Sim from Flight One Tech, it's primarily small light GA craft that would be used as a trainer. So it's the 172 and the 152, and you can pay a little bit extra and get a Baron, and there's a Cirrus add-on that actually gives you a Cirrus perspective version of the G1000 software, along with profiles for the SR20 and the SR22. They've got the diamond, a couple of diamonds, including the DA42, which is the only twin that they've got. But that's it, really. You can change the V-speeds. You can actually edit the V-speeds in the software, so you can, in theory, adapt it to other aircraft that look very similar. So single piston engined aircraft, you can put in the right V-speeds for and use the C172, and you get roughly the right display for that. But it's really not that great a solution, and it doesn't cater for turboprops or jets. Flight One Tech do have versions of their G1000 software for the Mustang, being a jet, and for turboprops, but they don't include that functionality in the Student Simulator. And when I asked them, they told me they were not planning on doing it. Their main business is in selling turnkey training systems for which they use the software, but they are keeping all of those features, all those advanced features, including synthetic vision, for just the turnkey business. They're not going to put it into the Student Simulator. I guess they're worried about cannibalizing their market. I don't know. I think it's a fairly regressive approach. Noble Flight Sim, it's pretty much the same. They support a couple of aircraft types. They have a Cirrus perspective version supporting a couple of Cirrus aircraft types, but that's it. I'm not aware that you can even edit the V-speeds on that software. You might be able to, but they don't provide a way to adapt the system to aircraft that it wasn't pre-sold with, and there's no guarantee they're going to be willing to add support for your favourite aircraft, because the G1000 is used in a lot of things, from the 172 all the way up to the Phenom 300 and a couple of other biz jets. The DA62 has the G3000. There's a lot of units. Even MSFS comes with about 5 or 6 aircraft in the deluxe edition that have G1000 in them. And if you want to fly all of those with this unit, you're going to have a problem if it only supports the gauges necessary for a piston engine like the 172. So, the reason I bought the Simionic solution, other than the fact that the having all the work done on the iPad means it's not using CPU cycles on your Sim PC, and it's not destroying the frame rate, and it's effectively an off-board solution. The reason that I did it was because it is configurable, and I'll show you what I mean. So again, I'm going to need the up-close camera for this. So I touch top right, I get this settings dialog. That allows you to change a bunch of settings. It tells you what nav data cycle you're on. Simionic provide updates to the navigational database on a monthly basis. This is not Navigraph. I don't know exactly where they're getting their data from. You can't install Navigraph on this. There's no way to do that. So if this would be the only thing you need Navigraph for, then you probably don't need it anymore. But they do update it reasonably often, and it seems to be reasonably similar. Although I have noticed a few missing airports and other things when I've been flying around. You've got, you can set up the SIM connection, you can connect it to an MFD, you can look at the hardware bezel, you can adjust the backlight, so I can turn that off. I should be able to turn that up and down, and it actually affects the backlight. As you can see, the backlight's pulsing up and down. But I'm going to let the simulator control that. Disable iPad auto lock, kind of important, and other bits and pieces. But the important tab, this one. So, with the Simionic software as is, you get these aircraft. So the Cessna 182, 172 SNR, and the Cessna 206H. That's it. There's also the Beechcraft G58 Baron, but that's an add-on. So again, I want to cover costs later, but I'll mention that you have to download these apps from the App Store. There is a small cost to get the apps on top of the cost of the bezels, but it is small. And then there is an even smaller cost for these in-sim purchases like the G58 profile. But then there's also the customization tab. Now you have to, again, add on the capability to customize, but it's only a small charge. I think it was like $2. And once you do that, you can touch that, and now you have a dialog where you can enter custom profiles. As you can see, it will support pistons, turboprops and jets, single and twin, different numbers of cylinders, etc, etc, turbocharged, constant speed, all of those things, right? I've got a caravan profile set up for the Cessna Caravan, which is what I'm in right now, and so I've put in things like the ITT range, the torque range, the RPM range, the fuel tank capacity, the fuel flow, the oil pressure, oil temperature range, all stats that I got from the stats for the engine, that it needs a trim indicator and a flaps indicator, that its takeoff range for trim is between 40 and 50%, and then the various different V speeds for the Caravan. Don't moan if you think those are wrong. There are different sources of information on the internet, and I guess they can't all be completely right. But this is the Caravan EX. And once you're done, you can hit save or save and activate. It is saved to the iPad itself. It's not saved online anywhere, so if you do lose the iPad, you do lose the customizations. It might make sense, therefore, to keep a record of these settings somewhere. But once you've got them, you can just pick the aircraft you want, go back to this tab and say OK, and it will change. So let me go over to the 172S and then say OK. Nothing changed there, but over here you can see we've now got a single gauge for piston engines. We've got all of the usual bells and whistles for piston engined aircraft, and we've got we can look at the system stuff, we can look at the leaning, etc. And if I go back in again, back to the aircraft, back to customization, to my Caravan, and say OK there, suddenly we've got the dials for a turboprop. And this is genius, because although Simionic have not chosen to put any turboprop aircraft or jet aircraft into their base pack, and nor are they making any available as add-ons at the moment, although they might do, they've given you all the tools that you need to be able to do that, because the display is capable of showing the right engine instrumentation for piston, turboprop and jet, single and twin, and other bits and pieces. And although it's not perfect, it's not perfect representation, and I dare say if I went with a jet like the TBN, there's quite a lot of extra bells and whistles on its G1000 implementation that you won't get here, but you get enough to control the aircraft and see it as it should be seen and manage it as it should be managed. And that is something, in my experience, that no other G1000 solution can do. End of story. The Mindstar can't do it either. None of them provide you the opportunity to customize at this level. This is the only solution that does, that I'm aware of. So unless you're aware of another one, in which case tell me in the comments. This is kind of where you're at if you've got a generic pit and you want to do G1000. So I guess the next question is, do I recommend the G1000 from Simionic or do I not? Well, the answer is a qualified yes. These are expensive pieces of hardware. I don't have the pricing to hand right at the moment, but my recollection is that I spent somewhere along the lines of $1,500 US for this hardware, and more on top, I think certainly over 100 for the shipping. And the shipping is from China. It does come by sea. It does take a little while. It will be several days before they turn up, and I did have to pay import VAT as well, so that added to the cost. So by the time I was done, I don't think I had much change out of £2,000 UK, and rather more than that in terms of dollars. So you've got to want to make that level of investment if you're going to do this, and I appreciate for some people that's just too much to consider. For me, this is really important. I'd owned the Emutech for about 5 years. To be honest, it had reached its end of life for me, and the units have got a bit scruffy as well. So I was in the market for this. I knew I was going to have to spend this kind of money, and I don't begrudge doing it. But it is a factor that obviously most people have to consider when they're deciding whether or not to buy this. You of course don't have to buy the full set. You can buy just the PFD, for example, and just fly with that. But you know, that would be a little bit pointless, because the G1000 is only really any good when you've got the whole thing as a combined system. The audio panel for MSFS, you can take it or leave it because it doesn't do a lot, but actually in a really sophisticated simulation, the audio panel would probably come in very useful for controlling things in the sim, like which radio is active at the moment, those sorts of things. And then there's the iPads. You've got to buy the iPads as well, so that cost me, I think, about another £500 or £600. These were older iPads, they're iPad 8s, so they weren't the latest and greatest, they weren't the most expensive, and they're also kind of the minimum configuration in terms of RAM, etc. You don't need a huge amount of RAM, but that's still a cost. And as the software that runs on the iPads is being upgraded, it does eventually get to the point where they don't support older versions of iOS. And as you know, there is a limit of iOS where you can go on each generation device. So at some point, these devices will stop getting iOS updates, and when the G1000 software goes beyond that in terms of its support, where you need a higher version of iOS than I've got, as a minimum, I will have to get some more iPads. So even if the bezels are fine, I'll have to get new iPads. So you kind of got to commit to that process and understand that that would eventually be a thing. I suspect it's going to be hopefully a few years before that happens, but I don't know. I don't know where Apple's going to go or what they're likely to do. And because these are apps in the Apple App Store, they're not side-loaded or anything along those lines, you are kind of stuck with that ecosystem. And it is the disadvantage with this solution that you don't really have the level of control over the software and the software installs that you might like. At the same time, for me, because I wanted the customizability, it was the only solution I could pick, and also because it's off-board, it actually makes more sense from a performance perspective. So I'm happy with the compromises that I made, but I don't want to pretend like there aren't compromises, because there most certainly are. But all of that said, if you're in the market for a G1000 system and you would like to have something which runs off-board, doesn't require expensive additional software, and is customizable, this is where it's at. This is the only system you can buy. It's compatible with P3D, with FSX, it's compatible with X-Plane, with a different bridge software. It's compatible with Microsoft Flight Simulator reasonably. Simionic do a bunch of other hardware which I don't have. They do switch panels, they do standby instruments, they do a bunch of other gauges. They are working on creating entire GA panels for the 172 and other things that you'll be able to buy, and they all work together, and they can all cooperate. So you're buying into an ecosystem which, if you've got the money and you want it, is pretty extensive. So there you have it. That is the software and hardware combo G1000 from Simionic. It's a pretty good platform from my perspective. This isn't a review, nor is this a recommendation. I'm not being paid to recommend anything. I paid my own money for all of this stuff, so it's not sponsored in any way. I want to be clear, it is not perfect, it's not bug-free. There are some really irritating bugs at the moment, which will, I'm sure, get solved. The developer, and it does appear to be a solo developer actually doing the software, is reasonably responsive. He's certainly more responsive than all commercial developers that I've worked with. Well, let me rephrase that. He is a commercial developer, but I mean the big company developers. Noble Flight Sim, when I contacted them, were very responsive and very interested, obviously, in the sale, but also just in talking about their software and ideas and helping me with my evaluation process. So I don't want to tar them with the same brush as Flight One Tech, as an example, who I found less helpful, particularly if you haven't paid your service plan upgrade that year. I think Noble is a good option if you're in the market for that kind of solution. Although, like all the others, it is very expensive for what it is. Of course, it takes a lot of custom programming to build software like this. It is not a cheap or easy enterprise, but if an individual developer can do it at this kind of cost level, you got to wonder if the big firms aren't missing a trick somewhere. At any rate, not a review, not a recommendation, just my 2 cents, I suppose. I went with it for specific reasons. I'm reasonably happy with it. You can see how it works. I guess it may help you in making your decision, and if so, then that would be good. Then the video will have served its purpose. So the only thing that's really left to do is to actually go for a fly. with the G1000 and see how it works. So let's do that. Alright then, here we are in the cockpit, and I've got my usual multicam solution going. You should be able to now see the view outside the window from MSFS, the G1000 screens from Simionic, and of course the in the cockpit view. This is an example of the video style we're going to be using going forward. I've got my iPad Pro here with ForeFlight running as well, and I'm just going to clear the route I've got in there because that is inaccurate. I am at Karoo Gateway in South Africa. Honestly, no reason I chose this other than that it was small and out of the way. I'm on the runway, I've spawned on the runway. We're not going to bother with any of the setup stuff. We are ready to go pretty much. All I need to do, a little bit of G1000, quick setup, so I'm going to climb initially to 2,000 feet, let's say. So we'll put that in, and I'm going to VS it up at about 800 feet per minute. There we go. And I want to set the runway heading, and I'll set heading mode. So when I turn on the autopilot, we will be already ready to go, and I can concentrate on some other things. The MFD I've just got on the map view, you can of course zoom out a bit and see more of the local territory. I can turn off the airways. I can do various other bits and pieces. I can terrain. Obviously, at my height, most of the terrain is red. But we'll leave that as it is for now. We've got all the declutter options that you would expect. We're just going to go for a very simple little fly. Again, I have nothing configured in the internal autopilot at all. So some of what I've set there will have carried over, and some of it hasn't. In fact, not even the altitude has carried over. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter because the iPad will do it all for me. Right. Also, you will notice I've changed my view to exclude the instrument panel. I'd do that anyway, but actually, if you look, my eye line is about here, so I want the horizon here. By default, in MSFS, the horizon would be in the middle of the screen. Now, you can't define an asymmetric view frustum, so you can't drop that line by saying that the middle of the view frustum is actually this far down the screen. That's not something you can do. I hope it's something you will be able to do when they come up with their multi-screen support, which I'm hoping will come out sometime before the end of 2022. But while we only have a single screen, the quickest way to do that is just to tilt the camera. So I've just put a camera tilt option on my joystick here, and I can quickly tilt it when I start the flight. It does mean that the outside view is very slightly distorted because it's the rough equivalent of me sort of tilting my head back and looking down this way. But it works reasonably well. I'm not unhappy with it. All right then, let's go for a fly. I'll just note my new Virtual Fly TQ6 Plus here. Again, other throttle quadrants are available. This was my birthday treat to myself. I used to use the Satec throttle quadrants, you may recall, for prop and turboprop flying, and I had two of the Satec units to give me the 6 levers for twins, but they were two separate units and I keep having to change the handles. These are supplied as a single 6 handle unit, and the handles are right together, so you can just use the two throttles as if it was a single throttle in this single throttled aircraft, and the same for the prop and the mixture. So I'm also pretty happy with that. I might talk more about that at a later date, but let's get on the pedals. I've just set a direct route to a very nearby airport because this is not going to be a very long flight. Yeah, let's get on with it. Right, all my lights are set. My flaps need setting. There we go. Flaps are set. Trim is set. We're ready to go. So yeah, let's. I can't remember if the parking brake's on or not, but we'll find out. Let's advance the throttles. Yeah, parking brake is set. Parking brake off. It's illogical to spawn on the runway and then have the parking brake set, Microsoft. Very significant initial pull to the left on the Caravan. In fact, the pull to the left is constant.
How realistic it is, I don't know, but I'm having to put in quite a lot of right rudder to stay on. You'll notice there's no markers on the speed tape. On the custom aircraft profiles, you don't get markers for the V-speeds. Again, I would like them to add that function, but for now you just have to remember my rotation speed is 70 knots, and we're up. One thing I've realised is that my altitude is silly because we were already at over 3,000 feet. Flaps coming up. So I'm going to set my altitude to 5,000 feet and bring in the autopilot. So now the sim is under the control of Simionic. This is not the in-game autopilot. If I go down here, the autopilot is not turned on. Okay? That's important to note. If you've got add-ons which expect the autopilot to be engaged when you do this, well, to be honest, I don't know what you're going to do. I'm not sure there are any options other than having to press the autopilot button in two different places. Turn that down, it's still a bit loud. So this is the very first time you've seen Microsoft Flight Sim on this channel. I'm sure it's not the first time you've seen Microsoft Flight Sim if you're at all into flight simulators, so I'm not going to give you a tour or a review or anything, but I will just pop outside and have a look at the scenery of the caravan. It's a nice looking aircraft. Got my custom registry of GHOST. Get it. And we got some nice looking mountains in the background here. And off to that side, eventually is the coast. Down the terrain, it's not bad. The water effects are not bad. I'm pretty much running everything on ultra here in 4K. Surprisingly good frame rates, really. I mean, get this kind of performance out of P3D with these graphics would be hard. I will admit that. By the way, I haven't completely jumped ship to MSFS in case you're thinking that. It is the only thing I've got installed on this temporary sim at the moment, but I will put P3D back on here. It's just going to need a lot of configuration. And I want to save it until I really need it for something different. So for now, at least, you'll be seeing MSFS content. Some cars on the road down there. Let's pop back in the cockpit. Look around. Rail yard down there. Foot the mountains down there. 73 miles to this airport because this is a pretty remote part of South Africa. We're not going to go the whole way. In fact, to be honest, what I might do is just reverse course and land back where we came from. This is just a very quick demo flight after all. But you can see the synthetic vision working. Things are flat, so it's not like it's that great. I mean, with that level of elevation, you're not going to see an awful lot. Right, so what I'll do is go back to FABW. The easiest way to do that is to bring it up, turn the inner FMS knob to the left, which will prompt you for FPL nearest and recent. Nearest is FABW, so I'll say yes. So now I've reprogrammed myself to go back to the airport we came from, and its elevation is about 3,200, I think. Let's find out. 2,929, so let's call it 3,000 feet. So we're 2,000 feet above, so let's come down. Just VS it down, not going to take very long. We'll slow it down a bit so as not to overspeed. And we'll go back where we came and try a landing. There's the airport ahead of us. Karoo Gateway by the Karoo National Park. Looks like an interesting part of the world. Maybe I'll fly here again. Now, the runways are 0.8 and 2.6. The wind is 0 at 5. Yeah, it doesn't really matter, does it? We'll go with whatever's easiest, which will be runway 08. So we're going to land on 08. I'm not doing any ATC or anything like that. That's a whole different ballgame in MSFS. We'll talk more about all that stuff in future videos. But you can see it all works as it should. There is a little bug where things do occasionally disconnect, particularly the MFD will disconnect from the PFD, and it'll usually pick up that connection again pretty quickly, and if it doesn't, then you can reset it manually. There's a bug there that needs fixing, but I believe that they're on it. So let's just descend into this airport. Right, well, we're nearly configured for landing. Let's just have some flaps out. More flaps. And then we're going to go on to manual. No autopilot disconnect sound there. Because of course it disconnected on the iPad, but it was never connected on the Sim. So again, I would really like it, I think, if Simionic were able to create more synchronization, or they were able to get their the bridge software to actually play the sounds from the G1000 actually on the PC, and then you can have that as your single source of sound. So again, something I think I will suggest to the developer. Right, let's actually start to come down a bit, shall we? 70 knots, don't want to get any lower than that. Give us a little bit more beans. Right, you should hopefully be able to see the runway now. We are 3 miles at about 800 feet. So, pretty shallow angle. Again, not trying to make a thing of the approach, I'm just trying to land it. Right, 1.5 miles, should be 500 feet. Sim might say 500, or it might not, because I don't think I've set the barrow correctly in the Sim either. Again, all things you would love it if it would synchronize. This is one of the issues with an off-board solution that doesn't communicate at the plug-in level with the Sim. Like the Flight 1 Tech G1000 software, for example, has an actual plug-in, so it has more access to the Sim guts than you can get over Sim Connect. Maybe that's the approach Simionic needs to take. Let's go idle. See the synthetic vision capturing the runway nicely there, and we are down. And I'm not going to bother to taxi to parking or anything. We'll get the flaps up. I have noticed an unfortunate tendency. Actually, I might taxi the parking, why not? Unfortunate tendency with MSFS for the nose wheel to be a little bit uncontrollable, frankly. You know, I'm having to put in a lot of rudder just to stay straight on the runway. I don't know if that's a bug, or maybe I just don't know how to taxi properly, which is certainly not outside the realms of possibility. tight turning here, which is not easy for the caravan if you know it. There we go. Let's have landing lights off, strobe lights off, and we'll just go and park somewhere over here. This is obviously all fully auto-generated scenery, so, but you know, it's not unreflective of I think what the buildings look like in this area. So kudos once again to the AI, and I could just follow the taxi lines, but I'm not going to. I'm really not going to. Instead, I'm just going to come around here and park up kind of here. There you go. Parking brake on. Traditional, when I'm playing MSFS, which I've been doing with friends, which is something I've never done with P3D, I have to say. I've never done VAT Sim, so I don't do a lot of online flying, but MSFS positively encourages it. But traditional, when you arrive somewhere, to pop out the drone camera, take it up a few feet, and just have a look at what surrounds you. So we've got some static aircraft, some vehicles, a bit of paving, a few buildings. Not entirely sure what this looks like in the real world. You can see some stuff on the ground photo there that's not represented. Hedges, and that might be a pond there. There's presumably a helipad there which has not been picked up and rendered. But again, that's, you know, the majority of just default AI created airports in the sim are like this. It's still better than you're likely to get in other simulators, I will freely admit. Alright. There we go. Let's get the right camera, there we are. And now I'm going to shut down, which is actually pretty simple in this aircraft. So, engine off, beacon light off, mixture to idle, make everything shut down. Sorted. And then panel lights off. You can see the backlight going on and off there. Avionics master off. Turns off the MFD. And then main battery off, turns off the PFD, apart from the AFCS line sign, which I've no idea why it's still there. And that's your lot, folks. That's the Simionic G1000 in action. I think it's pretty good, and if this has helped you decide what you want to do about your G1000 situation, whether it's this or some other solution, then hopefully this video has served its purpose. As always, thank you for watching. If you would like to subscribe, I'd welcome that, but please do click the little bell icon if you do, because the schedule here can be a little bit erratic. And if you liked the video, hit the like button. If you disliked it, please hit the dislike button. All feedback is always gratefully received. And I look forward to seeing you back on the channel very soon.